Corn and soybeans fall substantially during the week. Jerry Goodell is ready to comment on that right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Hello, Jerry. We had a crazy week. Corn and soybeans started strong the week, and then things changed.
Yes, they did. Early in the week here, we had some solid kind of export sales or export shipments. Just make sure that shipments were solid and above the needed trends, things of that nature. Early in the week, the weekly progress numbers on plantings and that a little less than expected on corn at 8%. Beans are a little higher than expected at 4%, but the winter wheat numbers on good and excellent came in unchanged at 27, which is really, I think some people noted it was the lowest good and excellent values we had for this particular week of the season ever. Now, there's been some slightly lower ones later on in the spring here, but the 27% definitely was not a very good indication of things that might come out of the Southwest at this point. That kind of carried into Tuesday. From there, even had a pretty good ethanol number on Wednesday here, jumped back above 1 billion. 1 million average production of corn usage, and that over is a 1,024,000 bushels, and that's really a positive number to say the least. From there, but basically from Wednesday on, the prices were on the defensive, primarily because of the National Weather Service's forecast of some rains finally getting into the Southwest here on Tuesday, Wednesday of this week, and so that kind of definitely is a big factor out there. The Southwest wheat, I think there's going to be a lot of that wheat is going to be zeroed out before this rain is going to come, because it really wasn't alive to begin with at this point. But it will be a benefit for some fields down there, there's no doubt. From there, though, the interesting twist on that as we got to the end of the week is that some of that forecasted rain wasn't really going to hit in some of the more important areas. The northwestern part of Kansas, where the basically the northwest corner of Kansas, and also parts of Texas Panhandle and on to that area. Looks like on the latest ones that came out here today or yesterday, don't have as much rain in those areas, which would be important. There's still plenty of rain in eastern Oklahoma, eastern Kansas, eastern Texas, but that isn't the prime wheat areas. But that's still a factor that
And
we've got
a
to
lot
go.
was talked about South Dakota.
Oh yeah, well, South Dakota's needs some rain up there too, in that the western half of South Dakota on into even some parts of Montana. Actually, Montana produces or has more winter wheat than South Dakota does. But the real deal in the North Dakota and the northern plains has been the flooding and the rapid melt of the snow up there. Definitely has impacted significant areas and that definitely when I was in early this week, or I should say early last week, I was attending me in Omaha. Definitely the Missouri River looked significantly high at that point. And there, I don't think it was in flood stage, but it was close. But definitely, plenty of that situation is going to be a factor on the Missouri as we go through here. Actually, the biggest news was out in Central California, where the snow melt out of the the Rockies and Sierra Madres has really impacted a lot of that Central California land, which is highly productive. Not so much for U.S. corn and soybeans and wheat. It's highly important to the vegetable world. So that's something that everyone needs to keep in mind, that lettuce won't be cheap this year. It doesn't look like on that part of the world, but in general, uh, we had the weather forecast, and as we look at some of the other statistics here, where the exports were a little less than expected from there, so that didn't help the psychology of things here going into the end of the week. And the biggest factor maybe that came in here was announcement. We had another 77,000 tons of cargo that was sold uh, in Brazil to the U.S. off of the Amazon River, and that psychologically, it's not a big total. I calculated the two together here, and it's about 3 million bushels. But whenever you have those kind of things pop up, uh, and that the having imports on soybeans always grabs lots of attention, and so that kept the soy complex on the defensive, and in general, this the whole agricultural markets were on a kind of a defensive posture after we hit some highs there on Tuesday.
Yes, and talking about Brazil, we had very low soybean prices in Brazil. So, do you think that has generated an impact also?
Oh well, the low basis levels and things like that. That's really been a interesting scenario of lack of storage, lack of sales, things like that has really psychologically kept soybeans on the defensive. And as we just mentioned, there has actually been some sales that isn't. We've had sales between Brazil and the U.S. over the last 20 years, and that, but having that pop up, that just gives another indication that their basis levels down there, which I kind of hear they're in $2 plus type values below the futures market, and that, so that's significant to be able to load things out, and and also just doesn't suggest that there's going to be a lot of purchases from various buyers around the world to the U.S. They're going to be looking at South America. The biggest thing about that is, though, how soon can they get it out of there? They've got a lot of transportation issues along the way, but in general, the I don't know that the size of the crop is substantially higher than the 150, 355 million metric ton level. It's just the fact that that this year's output is, for practical purposes here, right around 20 to 25 million metric tons higher than it was last year, and so that significantly impacts the whole transportation and exporting facilities down there, and maybe also spur some more storage down in there so that they don't have this particular issue. Because right now, at least, their optimism is still out there about more and more sales in Brazil to China, and so. But the Chinese can't take everything at harvest; they have to have it spread out. So maybe that'll and spur more storage down there in the country, and then maybe even at some export facilities.
Yes, and regarding wheat, this week we had the European Union saying the several countries cannot just ban Ukraine wheat.
Yes, yes. Well, we've had this kind of building scenario because of wheat and corn being exported, and unfortunately, this is not a good thing for Ukraine. They needed to have these whip bills of lading going on out to export facilities and bio exporting out of like Poland, example, or going to Hungary. There's really not much of an export market there. They shipped it there, and then they forgot to send it on somewhere else, that aggravated a lot of the Eastern European countries. Romania also included in that. from there, and they decided that they were going to basically say, no, we're not taking more trains. Now, I agree that the EU came in and finally said that individual countries can't make this decision, but they also made sure that the Ukrainian shipments needed to have a place to go, and they weren't staying in these countries. So to some extent, the Ukrainians need to make sure that the shipments, once they get out of their borders, also continue on to wherever they're supposed to be going, and not just all of a sudden they get across the border and they lose their transportation papers or where they're going. So, but in general here, the other big factor that came in at the end of the week, which didn't really provide or didn't happen to jump uh, into wheat and corn prices, was the fact that the Russians continue to be obstinate about any particular ideas here about extending the grain corridor after May 18th. And the popular press right now is just basically indicating that they're not going to do anything, and that's going to fall apart on May 18th. Now, I'm not sure what that means, if they're going to be attacking ships that leave Ukrainian ports with grain, or they're not going to let them come in because they're not going to inspect them in Turkey there. But in general, it definitely suggests that the squeeze is on by Russia about trying to cut off some of the money that Ukraine has been able to generate from these sales to help support their war effort from there against the Russians, since the Russians haven't had much luck of getting their forces to take out the Ukrainians. So it's definitely a wild situation, because all of a sudden here, it's kind of surprising that the world has not got too excited about the fact that the Russians are doing this ploy at the same time that the Europeans are talking about that. It's a situation where the amount of grain coming out of Ukraine, at least into the world markets, could be significantly restrained here, going, well, basically mid-May on through whenever. The Russians, of course, are going to potentially go ahead and keep moving their exports. But that's a feature that's really important. And then you tie that in with, is it going to rain in the Southwest? And where it rains out there, and how important that is, because we're really on the major cusp of U.S. wheat production potential out there. If a significant area of the Southwest doesn't get all that much moisture, and the current one has rains coming from Colorado through Southwest Kansas and on into eastern Oklahoma and eastern Texas, that's not really where the wheat is. So we'll see if that turns out to be the path of the rainfall. In general, the U.S. Crop protection could be there. Well, maybe we'll get more reports also about what's happening here with the USDA's inspectors out there looking at this wheat crop. How much has already been there? That was interestingly enough one of the discussions that came up at the last week. I took a trip from Chicago, a driving trip across northern Illinois, central Iowa, and on into Oklahoma, on to Omaha, and that. And that particular discussion we had down there in Omaha of various analysts and USDA people, and that was everybody's kind of optimistic that the El Nino is going to help corn and soybeans. There wasn't as much optimism about the wheat because it's so far along. So definitely the 2023 prospects are a big part of what prices are doing right now.
Yes, and what are you expecting regarding next week?
Well, that's a very tricky one right now. We've really took things back down to where we kind of started things here, particularly in the corn and soybeans. It's going to be highly dependent on this wheat market's mentality at this point. From there, in general here, the one thing I did observe on my driving trip there across the Iowa on Highway 30 was, in general, the fields have been prepped last fall. Either the cornfields either been disc or the bean fields are ready to disc this time. And there was somewhere in this in Iowa, probably 10 to 15% there. Northern Illinois is a little tricky because it didn't seem to have as much preparation, but the central part of Illinois is where all the plantings were last week that were over 10% on corn. And that, but in general, if we can get the weather to straighten out, and that's the one that's been weird about this is that we're kind of getting some of last year's tendencies in here about cool weather, along with some kind of misty, rainy situations, and that doesn't promote people going out and putting seeds in the ground. Interestingly enough, one of the worst things to do is invest all their money into the seeds and fertilizers and stuff like that. And you put it into an environment that isn't all that warm, then all of a sudden the seed sits in the ground and it could end up having deteriorations or rot or all this kind of stuff. So I think that's part of the reason why, despite the land being in easy preparation situations and that, and could see a very significant jump in plantings. I think most people are making the right decision not to go out there and plant something in a cold ground. Normally, everybody wants to have it 50 to 55 degrees. There early in the month, there were some places that had that high enough soil temperature, I should say. Not recently after this cold spell, and it's going to hang around here in the central part of the U.S. Until the end of the week before we get back over 60 here in Chicago. So it might get warmer in Missouri West and that, or Missouri River and West, but it's going to be a real factor right now. I guess it's going to be a choppy situation right now. I kind of feel like that the issues in the Black Sea and the constant indications that the Russians are going to cut that particular source of exports in corn and wheat could be a positive supportive factor. But in general, this after we had the early enthusiasm last week that kind of ran into some important technical factors in that, I think this market's going to be sideways at best here for a bit, and we'll see how things develop. But the one thing that the idea of El Nino on the way on a worldwide basis definitely is a positive for potential corn and soybean yields in the U.S., and that's kind of the overriding thing. So producers need to think about that opportunity to utilize any kind of rebounds toward the recent highs or that type of thing in both corn and soybeans to move up their sales towards the 90% or more. This is right now, at least, the mindset is that the 2023 prospects are going to be better than last year's 173 bushel yield in corn. The biggest problem, and one of the big discussions that I've tried to lead at this meetings last week, was that the USDA's 181.5 bushel yield might be a tad optimistic about being in the middle of the range of expectations for the coming year. I have to say myself that it's a 178 kind of number. We haven't been over 177 in 8 or 9. Above 177 ever. And so the prospects of taking something like 173 and anticipating it to be a 181 for this year as a middle of the range. Now that the top of the range, I think that's possible, but that's one of the big discussions that happen. Put it out there, and it will be something we'll all watch going forward in 2023. But in general, the markets are tied in with the long-term weather forecasts here for corn and soybeans, and what's going to happen in the Southwest as a counterfactor here as we go forward.
All right. Thank you very much.
Always good to talk, Luis, and we'll take a shot at it next week.